Hello, welcome to the Bible Standard. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe, and drop a comment in the comment section and we'll do our best to get back to you.
I always start these talks in Ezekiel 38, and I'd like you to turn that up with me if you wouldn't mind. Now, there will be some in this audience who will have seen the talks that we've given in Australia and elsewhere in recent times, but I don't think there will be too many. So some of you might have seen these things. I apologise to you now in preparation for that fact. But for those who haven't seen these things, we're going to look at some very interesting things that have been happening in our world in 2025 and have a look at the prospects for the year in which we now find ourselves. So what does Ezekiel 38 require in terms of Bible prophecy? The first 13 verses are very important. Verse 2 requires that there be a dictator called Gog, that is a title, it means the one at the top, who rules the entire northern continent of Eurasia. That's a pretty big area, as you're going to see in a moment. It requires in verse 5 that the territory east and west of Israel be under Gogian control, under the control of that dictator. In verse 6, that there will be a dependent Europe that falls under Gog's political control without the need for Russia to invade Western Europe. There's no mention of that in the Bible. It won't be necessary, as you're going to see this evening. In verse 8, it requires that the West Bank, as it's called, will be part of Israel proper at the time of Armageddon. We'll look at that tonight. It requires in verses 8 to 11 that Israel will be at peace both internally and with its near neighbours. Now, when you look at Ezekiel 38, have a look with me at what we read in verse 11. And thou shalt say, this is Gog planning his invasion, thou shalt say, I will go up to the land of unwalled villages. I will go to them that are at rest, that dwell safely, all of them dwelling without walls and having neither bars nor gates. Now, we have been wont to say that the unwalled villages are moshavim and kibbutzim. That's not what the Hebrew word means. See that Hebrew word there, perazah? That's the word that has been translated as unwalled villages. It actually means open country. And if you go to Israel and you hire a motor vehicle in Jerusalem to drive to the Galilee region, you have two choices. You can go to Tel Aviv, go up Highway 2 through Megiddo into the Galilee region, or you can go down to Jericho and go up the Jordan Valley. You cannot go along the central massif of the land. There's a beautiful highway there. The Palestinians are not allowed to use it because Israel built it for military purposes. It's so they can move their forces very rapidly north through what they call the West Bank. But the Jews don't call it that. They call it Judea and Samaria. But the Palestinians can't use that road. I know, because we were blocked from using it. So here we've got, brothers and sisters, an open country. No walls, no bars. That 36-foot high wall that goes around what they call the green line's coming down. It's clip lock anyway. You bring a crane in there, you pick it up, you can put it out into the ocean and build a port at Ashdod or maybe even the Gaza Strip. It'll come down. That's what that verse is telling us. And it will be open country. So when you hire your vehicle in Jerusalem, you go straight north along the central massif into Galilee. Well, we're not too far away from that, as you're going to see tonight. We're not very far away from that becoming a reality. It should have happened last year. It didn't, but it probably will happen this year. Now, the next thing that this chapter tells us in verse 12 is that Israel will be very prosperous and envied at the time of Armageddon. In verse 13, they will have allies in the Middle East. Yemen, Saudi Arabia, and the Gulf states will be the first to oppose the Gogian invasion of the land of Israel. Not Britain, not America, not Australia, but these nations who have been the enemies of Israel. And of course, you know, there's been a very good advancement in bringing some of those nations to become allies of Israel. And there's still a way to go, but it won't take long before that too will be fulfilled. And of course, we've got Britain and the young lions who follow suit in that same verse. Now, this man has changed the world in which we live. You know that in Canada, don't you? He's certainly changed the way we live. And the world has been turned upside down by this man. He'd been put there by God, obviously. God made him stew in his own juice for 4 years while Biden ruled, so that when he got back in, he wouldn't do some of the silly things he did in his first term. He wouldn't allow himself to be, got off the track of his policies as he was in his first term. He put the wrong people in place. He's now put the right people in place. And the very first day, he signed 300 edicts to change things. And every single day, something new happens, doesn't it? From this man. He's been put there by God. For the Most High rules in the kingdom of men. He sets up over it whomsoever he will, even the basest of men. You're probably not going to get too much more base than the character of that man. So here we've got, brothers and sisters, God at work. And there are increasingly likely outcomes as a result of what the angels are doing through this man. The imposition of a temporary peace on the Middle East. We've already got that partially, haven't we? The war's not over, but it's certainly in a stalemate situation, including a resolution of the Palestinian issue. We'll talk a bit about that. The extension of the Abraham Accord to include Saudi Arabia and other Middle East nations. That's one of his aims. The further withdrawal of support from Ukraine, forcing a capitulation to Russia. His policy in that regard. He says that Ukraine should give up the Donbass. They should give up those areas in the east that Russia has kept. They should give up the Crimea. They're not interested in that, but that's his policy. And he's putting pressure on them to get some outcome. He's a deal maker. He wants that to happen. And of course, eventually the scripture says it will happen, as we shall see. The isolation of America from its traditional allies, of which Canada is one, through the America First policy, and the triggering of the looming depression. I'm going to talk about this at the end of our class tonight. The looming depression by tariff wars and financial mismanagement. So we're going to talk a little bit about that as well. And there are even more potential outcomes from Trump being used by God. Who would have thought the Greenland grab would come along? But this has really upset his NATO partners, hasn't it? Really upset them, because, of course, he doesn't really care about NATO. In his first term, he said that if the European nations don't cough up the required amount, 3%, to maintain NATO, he's getting out. Well, he was advised not to go down that path. But he's clear about that, and they have coughed up. But now, of course, he's upset them massively. So he'll ultimately dissolve. Impetus will be given to the rapid rise of the far-right political parties in Europe. We'll talk a bit more about that later, who have openly declared policies to align with Russia. Europe already has 5 right-wing governments and several others who will shortly have right-wing governments. That will result in the dissolution of the European Union. That's required by prophecy in its present form. And if Trump's policies trigger a depression, and they're heading in that direction, 10 nations to the south of the Rhine and the Danube will emerge to fulfill Daniel chapter 7, verses 7 and 11. Now, I'm not going to take you there for the sake of time, but this is what we are looking to happen. We're looking for the old Roman Empire to be restored. Because in Daniel chapter 7, there's a 4th beast, and that 4th beast is totally destroyed in verse 11 of that chapter. You cannot destroy something that doesn't exist. It has to be restored, and Russia is going to accomplish that. And when this Great Depression falls, brothers and sisters, we'll have an area, you can see there and bound by that red line, we'll have an area where there are going to be 10 nations, because that's what Scripture requires, 10 nations who will be dependent for leadership and guidance by the Pope. The Pope has to acquire really massive power in Europe. It's only going to happen on the back of depression. And we've been given some insights into this. Look what happened in Russia. They went back to religion in Russia in the 1990s when you had poverty and misery. Where do people go when you've got poverty and misery? They go back to religion. And so the papacy is going to acquire enormous clout. And we're going to have the revival of the beast of the sea, that is the papacy with political influence and power in Europe. We're going to have the 4th beast of Daniel chapter 7, verse 7 revived. And of course, we're going to have Babylon the Great develop out of that, of Revelation chapter 17. Now, if you think things are not moving in that direction, think again. Because this is what's happening in European politics. This woman here, Marine Le Pen, stood twice for president in France. She's lost both times to Macron. One of the problems she had in one of the elections back in 2017 was that it was revealed that her party, the National Front, which is an extreme right-wing party, was being funded by the Kremlin. That didn't help win her many votes in France, but she has a certain policy. You see in the middle of that slide, as leader of the National Front, she advocates leaving the Eurozone, which means the end of the European Union, withdrawal from NATO, end of NATO, abolition of the International Monetary Fund, limits on immigration because of the Muslim problem, and forging what she calls a privileged partnership with Russia. Can I read that again? A privileged partnership with Russia. She is a smidgen away from ruling that country because Macron is in deep trouble. France is in deep trouble. When the time comes, if there's a depression, and it's coming, there's no doubt that she'll come to power in France. And when she does, they're going to cuddle up to Russia. See what she says at the bottom of that slide? Marine Le Pen described Russian President Vladimir Putin as a defender of the Christian heritage of European civilization. She sees Putin as the defender of the Christian faith, the Catholic faith. So you can see where that's heading. And that's also happening in Germany. They had an election early last year in Germany in which the AfD party, the Alternative for Deutschland party, another extreme right-wing party, went from 10.4 of the vote 5 years ago to 20.8. They doubled their vote, 20.8. They're the second largest party in the Bundestag. And their policies are almost identical to Marine Le Pen's. So when the time comes, brothers and sisters, there's already 5 right-wing governments in Europe. There's several others who are very close. France and Germany are not that far away. When this depression comes, what will happen is that those parties, those right-wing parties, will come to power and they will cuddle up to Russia. Russia won't need to invade Western Europe. It'll fall into their lap. And that, of course, is exactly what we read in Ezekiel 38. No need for war. They will just collapse. It's better to be red than dead. That's the policy, and that's the way it will go. So let's turn then to the war in Ukraine. It's dragging on, isn't it? And a lot of lives being lost, a lot of equipment being destroyed as well. There are 2 references there, 2 translations from very literal translations of Ezekiel 38 verse 2. But this is the one phrase I want you to focus on. Son of man, set thy face against Gog, the title, the one at the top, a dictator. Look where he's from. Of the land of Magog. Okay? Same with the Amplified Bible, exactly the same. That is a very, very sound translation. Now, what that means to me when I read that is that the plan to invade the land of Israel, the Middle East, because they're going to go to Egypt first, the plan to invade the Middle East, as we call it, will be hatched in the Ukraine. Did you hear that? The Ukraine. And we need to find out where this land of Magog is. And this map will help. Now, the red on this map, you see right from Spain, right across through Siberia. You've got Libya. You've got the Sudan to the south of Egypt, all under Russian control. You've got the entire region from Syria across to Pakistan under Russian control at the time of Armageddon, which is what Ezekiel 38 requires. And you see that arrow pointing to Magog? Yeah. So where is this Magog? Well, when you look at a map and you go to the historians, this is where the land of Magog is. Now, we have been wont to say, well, it's Germany. Magog's Germany. Well, yes, Germany was in what's called the land of Magog, but it's not the largest piece of country, not the largest nation in Magog. The largest portions are Ukraine and Belarus. And that's, of course, on the eastern side of what they call the land of Magog, and it also embraced a portion of what we would call Russia today. So what is happening in the Ukraine is not by accident. It's happening because the Bible requires it. The Bible requires that Ukraine be ruled by Russia, and that is where the plot to invade the Middle East will be hatched. So why can we say that? Well, we can say it because Putin's told us that that's his intent. And the Bible says, yeah, that's what's going to happen. He wrote an article. Some of you will have read that article on the historical unity of Russians and Ukrainians. It was a very long article, and Putin knows his history. 12th of July 2021, you can look it up. And I would advise you to have a look at it. Then you'll understand why the war in Ukraine is going on like it and why Russia doesn't care about the losses that they're having. Because Putin intends to take over that country. Now, can you see the yellow of that map? That's the old Kievan Rus, the kingdom of the Rus, from which we get Russia. And it was ruled for a considerable time by Putin's hero. His hero was Vladimir the Great, or Vladimir the First. And of course, he wants to be Vladimir the Second, even greater than Vladimir the First. And so he wants to restore the ancient kingdom of the Rus. Now, its capital was Kiev, which is why when the Russians invaded on the 24th of February 2022, they sent their forces down the road to Kiev. They didn't get very far, but they were aiming to take Kiev. So that was their aim, because he made his position very clear. He said Russians and Ukrainians were one people, a single whole, all descendants of the ancient Rus. Now, this is a very small portion of the article. He says this: Russians, Ukrainians, and Belarusians, Belarus, got RUS on there and you can't mistake that, are all descendants of ancient Rus, which was the largest state in Europe. Slavic and other tribes across the vast territory from Ladoga, Novgorod, Sok to Kiev and Chernigov were bound together by one language, which we now refer to as Old Russia. Economic ties, the rule of the princes of the Rurik dynasty, and after the baptism of Rus, he's talking about Vladimir converting to the Russian Orthodox Church, the Orthodox faith, the spiritual choice made by what he calls St. Vladimir, who was both Prince of Novgorod and Grand Prince of Kiev, still largely determines our affinity today. So is it any wonder that Russia invaded Ukraine on the 24th of February 2022, and while they persist in a war which has cost them probably 700,000 men, and most of their tanks are gone because of the new phase of war, the use of those things that fly over and they drop bombs on you? Yeah. So it's changed the whole state of war. So what is the current situation in Ukraine? Well, the war's not going well for Ukraine, or indeed for Russia, whose forces in the east are making steady progress, taking towns one by one, albeit at tremendous cost. But Ukraine has a problem. It can call, at the beginning of the war, it could call on 500,000 men. They're now down to 300,000 men. Russia can call on a minimum of 5 million, and with support from other countries. So they won't run out of men to fight this war. And Ukraine has been steadily drained of fighting men, weapons and ammunition, and Trump, not like Biden, is not giving them any more weapons. He's selling them. He's selling them to the Europeans. He says, well, if you want to pass them on to Ukraine, that's fine. But America's not giving them any more weapons. This war is going to grind to a halt, even if there isn't a depression, and there will be one, as you'll see. So here we've got Ukraine in deep trouble, and desertions from the army is now the biggest problem that they have. Do you know that? Would you want to stay there and fight knowing you're going to die? When you know at the end, Russia's going to win. Would you want to stay there? They're getting out of there in their tens of thousands. I'm not sure about what happens in Canada, but I know this, that if you go into YouTube, you cannot avoid ads from Ukrainian women wanting to come to another country. You seen them? I don't follow them up, by the way, but you can't avoid it. There are people wanting to get out, and if I was there, I'd want to get out, particularly if I read my Bible, because Ukraine will fall. And vital infrastructure in Ukraine is being progressively destroyed, especially the power system. by persistent Russian attacks with their drones, particularly drones and also missiles. And right now, brothers and sisters, there are large areas of the Ukraine that don't have any power. How would you go? You're in winter here. It's minus 12 C. It's that temperature in Ukraine. How would you go? Without electricity. Yeah, well, there are large areas of Ukraine right now that don't have any power. And Putin's made sure of it. He's breaking that, people. And of course, when you look at that map and you see the pink areas there, that's the areas that Russia now controls. And they are pushing and they're taking over town after town. And this so-called expert here said that if Odessa, which is the only port that Ukraine has left, if Odessa is captured by the Russians, and they've made a few attempts at it, they will lose that port. There will be no exports going out because they are Ukraine, as you know, it's the wheat bowl of Eurasia. It supplies Africa and other countries with wheat and grains of all sorts. And Odessa is the port from which they export that. There'll be no exports and no imports of weapons. They will be cut off. And that will be, of course, collapse. And if you think Putin's worried about the fact that he might have lost 700,000 men, forget it. Here's a report that goes back to December last year. Russia says meaningful meeting with US on Ukraine peace proposal ends no closer to a deal. And it makes mention there, of course, of Witkoff and Kushner, Trump's agents that have gone to Russia. They've been there several times since that particular report. And the answer is the same. There's no deal. And we go on to read down that, read about halfway down. Putin said Russia was prepared to involve European states in negotiations as long as they recognise what he called the realities on the battlefield. What we've captured, he's saying, we are going to retain. The realities on the battlefield in Ukraine. Because he was actually responding to some European threats that they would put soldiers on the ground in Ukraine. And he said, don't do that. It would be silly. We have no intention of fighting Europe. I've said that 100 times. But if Europe wants to fight again and starts, then we are ready for that immediately. He doesn't have the tanks. He doesn't have a lot of troops. But he has 7,000 nuclear weapons. You take the rest of the world, brothers and sisters, America and every other country that's got nuclear weapons, and it comes to 6,000 in aggregate. Russia has got 7,000, and he won't have any diffidence to use them if they're required. So he's putting pressure on the European nations, and even Britain realises where this is heading. You know, Joel 3, verses 9 and 10 says, proclaim ye this among the Gentiles just before Armageddon. Prepare war, wake up the mighty men, let all the men of war draw near, let them come up. Beat your plowshares into swords and your pruning hooks into spears. Let the weak say, I'm strong. We're watching it. Because you've got Britain, Starmer, saying, we've got to put some money into defence. British Prime Minister Keir Starmer pledged the biggest sustained increase in defence spending since the end of the Cold War, as he readies to meet NATO skeptic US President Donald Trump. And many leaders down there in the blue have said that the increased spending must continue to counter the growing military threat from Moscow. So in review, brothers and sisters, I would say this. Just keep watching. It's slow, it's a slugging match, isn't it? And there's a lot of people suffering as a result of it. Just believe what the Bible says. Gog of the land of Magog, where the invasion of the Middle East will be planned. Thou shalt think an evil thought. So we know where it's going to be planned. Let's then turn to the Middle East. What about Trump in the Middle East? Well, one of the boasts of Trump during the election campaign was that he would bring peace to both the Middle East and to Ukraine in a very short space of time. He's talking about 24 hours, idiotically. Trump also said he would bring Saudi Arabia into the Abraham Accord, and he's since found out that that is not possible without a Palestinian state. Israel and the US decimated Iran's nuclear program in joint bombing raids, and Israel, of course, has massively curtailed Iran's proxies like the Hezbollah like the Houthis, like Hamas. They've damaged them seriously. And of course, there's an expectation that the regime in Iran will fall. Whether it does or not, we're not told in Scripture. What we do know is this, that it will become part of the Russian Confederacy. And I want to talk a bit about that in a second. And things, of course, are happening in Iran, as you well know. A lot of people are dying there, by the way. I even heard one report of 135,000. Now, that might be an exaggeration, but I wouldn't be surprised, because not only are the IRGC involved in machine gunning Iranians who are protesting against their government, you'll see the reason why in a minute, but they're now bringing in Houthis, and they're bringing in Hezbollah, they're bringing in Hamas operatives who don't care about Iranians. I mean, the IRGC is an incredibly tough organisation, but they're shooting their own people. But Houthis and Hezbollah don't care about Iranians, and they're machine gunning thousands of them. But they've got a problem. They've got a real problem. The report, you can see there, 5th of December 2025, a water crisis in Tehran. Tehran may be evacuated as taps run dry due to the water crisis. You can't even have a shower in Tehran right now. I looked it up. Has it improved? There are 9 million people in Tehran and 90 million people in Iran. I looked it up. February 2026, it hasn't improved. Tehran is facing a severe water crisis driven by a severe 6-year drought, and last year was the worst year of the 6 years. I think the angels might be at work here, making sure that it doesn't rain in Iran, because they want some movement there. This 6-year drought and mismanagement, pushing it towards complete water supply failure with main reservoirs critically low. The main one that supplies Tehran is down to 11%, and they're draining it every day, and there's no rain. There's nothing to fill it up. So they've got a serious problem. So their main reservoirs critically low, forcing nighttime and early morning water cuts. Well, people they want to have their showers when they come home from work, or they get up in the morning, want to have a shower. You can't, because they shut the water off. Imagine Canadians living like that. So what would you be doing about your government? You're protesting about your government. Well, that's what they're doing. They're protesting against the idiocy of that country's leadership. And the crisis stems, of course, from reduced rainfall, over-extraction for agriculture, outdated infrastructure, and unsustainable practices. And one American senator said, well, part of the reason for this, is that they have spent billions building weapons to destroy Israel and not looking after their own people. So regime change may come to Iran. It certainly came to Syria, didn't it? It came to Syria. On the 27th of November 2024, a coalition of opposition groups called the Military Operations Command launched a major offensive against the Syrian army and other pro-government forces in Aleppo, Idlib, Hama and Homs government. The Assad regime, of course, was overthrown in 11 days and he fled to Moscow. On the 29th of January 25, Syrian de facto leader Ahmed al-Sharaa was appointed president of Syria by the Syrian General Command. And on the 29th of March, he formed a transitional government. And Trump likes him. Do you know that? He likes him. And he is putting pressure, Trump is putting pressure on Netanyahu to negotiate with a terrorist who once declared he wanted the destruction of Israel. Didn't go down too well. So this is another problem. Now, would you trust that man? He had $15 million on his head 2 years ago. Now, of course, he's a favourite. He's dressed up in a suit. He looks like a Western political leader. Would you trust him? Israel doesn't trust him. So what next for Syria? There are 3 prophecies that determine Syria's future. They are Daniel 7, verse 7, Daniel 11, verse 40, and Isaiah 17. Now, I'm watching the clock. I can't take you to Isaiah 17, but I would ask you to have a look at it for yourself. Daniel 7, verse 7 requires the revived fourth beast, which we spoke about that, the Roman Empire, the revised fourth beast, to conquer what's called the residue of the Medo-Persian and Greek empires in the east. Because Rome, the Fourth Empire, never took from what we would call the Persian Gulf today to the Indus River, which was an essential part of the Medo-Persian and the Grecian empires. They never conquered that. It's called the residue. And Brother Maury Stewart points this out in his study notes on Daniel. The other passage is Daniel 11, verse 40. It calls the Gogian invader the king of the north. And that was the title given in Scripture to the Seleucid kings, the kings who ruled from Syria right across to the Indus River in Pakistan. And Seleucus was one of the generals of Alexander, of course. They're called the king of the north. Who were they? They were Greeks. So what do you need to be called scripturally the king of the north? You need to be a foreign occupier of that territory. It's the same territory that's called the residue in Daniel 7, verse 7. And there's a third reference. Now, some of you will probably still be in Ezekiel 38, and I'll show you in a moment, Ezekiel 38 and verse 6. But just have a quick look for yourself at Isaiah 17. It prophesies a repeat of history. The latter-day Assyrian, Gog, will remove the Syrian ruler and destroy Damascus. That history presaged the future. That's what happened in the past. It was a prophecy of the future. You've only got to read 17 very carefully. It's obviously about the future as well. Look at this map. You see that area of the Seleucid kingdom, the green, surrounded by the red border? That's what's called the residue in Daniel 7, verse 7. It has to be stamped, which means by conquest, boots on the ground. Stamp the residue with the feet thereof, it says in Daniel 7, verse 7. So Gog will conquer that territory before they take Constantinople, because they're called the king of the north. You cannot be called the king of the north until you are a foreign occupier of the territory of the Seleucid kings. Simple as that. So when you've got it, then you can take Constantinople. When you've got Constantinople, you've got the platform of the eastern leg of Nebuchadnezzar's image. And then you can invade the Middle East. So that's what prophecy outlines. Now, I normally spend 40 minutes on that. So that's all I'm going to give you. Except for this. Look at Ezekiel 38, verse 6. Verse 5. That should be changed up there. Should be verse 5. Persia, it says, Ethiopia. Now, when Ezekiel wrote, brothers and sisters, the Persia he was talking about in 600 BC was not Iran. It included Iran, but it wasn't Iran. We read Persia, we think Iran. Yeah, well, it's included. But have a look at a map of what Ezekiel knew as Medo-Persia. It was to the north, even to the west, and right across to the Indus River. And Babylon, which was the supreme kingdom at the time, for 70 years, was small by comparison. So when you read Persia in Ezekiel 38, verse 5, don't think Iran. Think that entire region from Syria across to the Indus River. And there are 3 passages that deal with that. Who knows, we might get a chance to talk about that later on in the week. I'll turn now to Ezekiel 38, verse 8. Yahweh's talking to Gog. After many days, thou, Gog, shall be visited. In the latter years, it's called over in verse 16, the latter days. In the latter years or latter days, thou shalt come into the land that is brought back from the sword and is gathered out of many peoples against the mountains of Israel. And of course, you and I know that there was no nation called Israel in the earth from BC 722 till 1948. There was no nation called Israel. And so it can only be a latter-day prophecy. And it's called the mountains of Israel. So what are we talking about here? Well, you can see that. Now, they call it the green line, but I've got a red one. See there on the map? Okay? That's where that 36-foot high wall goes right around what they call the West Bank. Where are the mountains of Israel? 90% are in what's called the West Bank, from Hebron to Mount Gilboa in the north. 90%. So if Gog's going to come down upon the mountains of Israel, Israel has to control and own what's called the West Bank. Now, that's not the only indication here. Have a look at verse 12 of Ezekiel 38. It says this. I'm not going to read the whole verse for the sake of time. Read the last 2 or 3 lines. These people in the midst of the land, they've gotten cattle and goods and they dwell in the midst of the land. Go to another translation and you'll find that that word midst there is the Hebrew word tabur. It means the centre, the navel, or as Rotherham and others translate it, navel or middle. So where is the middle of this land? Well, we know that Mount Hermon is the head. We know that the Carmel Range is the arm and the finger pointing out. We know that below that you've got the ribs. You look at a map of Israel. You know that down in the Negev area you've got 2 ranges of mountains like legs, and Psalm 133% sit that way, like a body, the body of the high priest. So where's the navel? I know where my navel is. How about you? I know where mine is. It's right in the middle of my body. Yeah. Like the West Bank is right in the middle of the land. So we know from this chapter that the West Bank will become part of Israel proper by the time of Armageddon. And if you had any doubt about that, then Isaiah 10 clears away the doubt. Because Isaiah 10 is about the latter-day invasion of the land of Israel by the Assyrians, the latter-day Assyrian, and they match exactly what the ancient Assyrian did. And where did the ancient Assyrian come? It came from the north. See those little red dots on that map there? All those green names in Isaiah 10, 28 to 32, like Aeth, Migron, Michmash, Geba, Ramah, it's Ramallah, Gibeah, Laish, Anathoth, etc. They're all smack in the West Bank. So the latter-day Assyrian will follow the same path as the ancient Assyrian when they come into the land, down through what's called here in Ezekiel 38, verse 8, the mountains of Israel. Conclusion, brothers and sisters, Israel will annex the West Bank. And they wanted to do it in 2025. They're very clear about that. Israeli Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich lays the groundwork for West Bank annexation in 2025. And he said the year 2025 will be the year of sovereignty for Judea and Samaria, which is their name for the West Bank. He said Trump's victory also brings with it an important opportunity for the state of Israel. We were a step away from applying sovereignty to the settlements in Judea and Samaria, and now is the time to do it. Well, they didn't do it because, of course, obviously it wasn't God's timing. It was political roadblocks. One of them might have been Trump, by the way. But they're preparing to annex the West Bank, and they're cleaning it up. November last year, Israeli forces launched major West Bank counter-terrorism raid, imposed curfew. The IDF and the Shin Bet launched a wide-scale operation overnight in the northern West Bank, citing attempts by terror groups to entrench themselves there. The Israeli government is turning a blind eye, brothers and sisters, to the settlers who are ransacking Palestinian land and farms, knocking down their homes, and they are preparing to take over that land. Did you read in Ezekiel 38, verse 12, which have gotten cattle and goods and dwell in the navel of the land? If you've been to Israel, you know that there's not that much good grazing land. You know where the best grazing land is? Between Shechem and Galilee. Best grazing land. Did you know that the Jews are now actively buying cattle from Texas? They're getting ready. They're getting ready. So here we've got indications that the Israeli government is going to take over that area. They are intent on annexing it. Both major political parties, whether they be right-wing or left-wing in Israel, have the same policy. It will become part of Israel proper. And you might have seen, I looked this up, you see on YouTube, you can actually see massive machines knocking down Palestinian homes in the West Bank. And the soldiers, Israeli soldiers, standing there watching it happen, because that's the government's policy. It will happen, brothers and sisters, as indeed will be the expansion of the Abraham Accord. And Trump designates Saudi Arabia as a major non-NATO ally in this report on November 19 last year. And of course, we know that he wants Saudi Arabia in the Abraham Accord. And he made it clear, didn't he? That was one of his major goals, but he has a problem. And the problem is that Saudi Arabia will not come in to the Abraham Accord until there's a Palestinian state. Now, Israel doesn't want that. We just took this photo recently in October, hanging on the walls, all over the walls in Israel. Make Gaza Jewish again. And Smotrich calls for renewed settlement in Gaza. There are 2 ministers in Netanyahu's government who live in the West Bank. They are among the settlers in the West Bank. So it's not surprising that they have that policy. And they are setting out to do that. So what does prophecy say about a 2-state solution, which is what the nations want? 157 nations voted in December 2024, again in September 2025, to have a 2-state solution. Some of those nations even declared a Palestinian state, which is ridiculous. Well, I'm not going to go into this because I'm watching the time. And some of you will have heard me on this before. But if you look at those 3 references, Joel 3 verse 4, and the context, very important to look at the context. I think I've done this before here. Zephaniah 2 verses 4 to 11 and Ezekiel 25 verses 15 to 17. You look at those 3 references, this is what you will find, that they are very clear about something. They are clear that there will be a state, a nation called Palestine. Now, check it out for yourself. Each context concerns the latter days and events involving the redemption of Israel. And each presages the existence of a nation. It's actually called that in Zephaniah chapter 2, a nation with a name associated with the Philistines. And the Romans gave the Jews, actually, when they overtook the Bar Kokhba rebellion of AD 135, the Romans, who so hated the Jews, wanted to do the worst they could to them, and they called them Philistines. Yeah, Jews they called Philistines. But in Latin, Philistines is Palestina. And the modern English word Palestine was Philistine. So when you read those 3 references, check them out, and you will see that there will be, the Bible is very clear about this, there will be a Palestinian state, and it will come about because Trump will have to give in to Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia is the D-down of Ezekiel 38 verse 13. It, along with the UAE and Oman and Yemen, that's the Sheba of that verse, will be allies of Israel at the time of Armageddon. So they're going to come in to that accord. But the price for that alliance will be the settlement of the Palestinian issue, whether Trump likes it or not, and whether Israel likes it or not. Now, I'm not going to go into this article because this article in Newsweek on the 24th of November 2024 made that position very clear, that Saudi Arabia has its own deal of the century for Trump. That was the title of his book. No Palestinian state, no progress on the Abraham Accord. And they made that very clear. And this gentleman here used to be at high levels in the Saudi Arabian government. And he said, this is a complex and thorny issue that was at the same time one of the most important pending issues of the Middle East, one in which Saudi Arabia was urgently looking for peaceful solutions, as long as they serve and enhance its interests, but not at the expense of the Palestinian cause. And they're going to have to go back to an old idea. Way back in 2017, this was a Debka report of what had happened in Saudi Arabia, that Riyadh, the capital of Saudi Arabia, had dropped its demand that Israel accept the Palestinian state with East Jerusalem as its capital. And since the original Saudi peace proposal, which the Prince Mohammed bin Salman called Plan A, was dead, it is necessary to move forward to Plan B. Plan B is essentially as follows. The state of Palestine would be established in the Gaza Strip, plus large tracts of territory to be annexed from northern Sinai. Egypt has agreed to that outline. So the idea's been around for quite some time, and that is the way it is heading. Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Egypt call on Hamas to disarm and to leave Gaza. They can see that there can only be a Palestinian state in the Gaza Strip with some additional land given by Egypt. None of them want, of course, Palestinian refugees. They don't want them. So they're going to have to agree to that. And each of the references, those three references, brothers and sisters, that you saw, those three references, each of them say that this state has a coastline. The West Bank doesn't have a coastline. The closest that it gets to the Mediterranean is 9 miles. This state's going to have a coastline, the Mediterranean coast. Now, I want to turn, seeing the time is getting away from me, I want to turn to the state of the world and what a state it's in. Woke. You know, in Revelation chapter 16 and verse 14, we read, for they, this is Christ saying through John, they are the spirits or ideologies of devils or demons, or as it was understood in those days, insanity. Spirits of insanity, working signs which go forth, and that's the phrase I want to focus on, go forth unto the kings of the earth and of the whole world. The word is oikoumene, the inhabited world. In other words, it was going to infect the whole world from top to bottom, and it has. You see, there was a time when I was young, when ideas, you know, in the 60s and 70s, ideas were changing, attitudes were changing. But it was slow, it was gradual. It was what they called, they called it Fabianism, because Fabian was a Roman general who had a policy of not going front on, not attacking front on. He would go around, he would feint, he would draw back, very gradual, you know. If you find any resistance, then go back and try another way. That was Fabianism. Gradualism, they called it. Not anymore. Wokeism has changed all of that, hasn't it? And that Greek word, rendered go forth, in Revelation 16, verse 14, means that. It means to go forth, to depart, to flow forth, to project from the mouth. And woke has completed the task begun by Fabianism and gradualism. No one on the planet is unconscious of its omnipresent and radical demands. It's in your face. And we know now it's mature because we're getting pushback. You've got Trump's pushback. You've got the Christian communities in America in particular saying, no more. I just read a little pamphlet from a Christian minister saying that, you know, that homosexuality is against Scripture, all right? Well, you're probably going to lose his job. But this is the kind of pushback that we're getting now. Trump's pushing back. Trump comes out and says what no other government in the world will say, that there's a man and there's a woman, all right? There's only a man and a woman, male, female. You can't do that in Australia. You can't do that. So there's evidence of insanity everywhere you look. The woke influences are now preaching that children owe nothing to their parents and should ditch them. Yeah, get rid of them. Parents should ask the consent of their baby to change their diaper, as you call it in this country. We call it nappies in Australia. You know, you've got a 3-month-old baby. You've got to ask a 3-month-old baby whether it wants its diaper changed. Really? You have people who don't put any restraints on their children as they're growing up in their younger years. This woman spent 10 years, what she called gentle parenting. Now admits it was a total mistake. Many parents are now being blamed for every problem their adult children experience, including their mental health. And if you don't think that's right, come and talk to me, because that's what we've been accused of. It's happening. And governments are not prepared to define what a woman is. You ask any Australian politician, what's a woman? I think I know what a woman is. They'll say, oh, no, I don't really know. Really? What insanity we have in our world. And the world's created a monster, hasn't it? It's created a monster that will soon be unleashed upon it in the time of trouble such as never was since there was a nation on the planet. Guns are tightly controlled in Australia. So knives and machetes have become the weapons of choice for young people. They have a big problem in the state of Victoria. Strict laws have been recently introduced to restrict a rash of stabbings. There's someone stabbed to death or seriously injured almost every second day. Police there in 2025 alone confiscated over 15,000 blades, including machetes, that young people were taking into the city on a Friday night. That's the state. In America, where guns are freely available, there are over 300 mass shootings every year, where there are more than 2 dead in a shooting. That's 365 one year. So this is the state of the world. Now, why is this important? Well, because you'll see in a minute, when we're taken, brothers and sisters, when we are removed to the judgment seat, all light in this world will have disappeared. There will be no more light, truth. It's gone. And that's when the gross darkness of Isaiah 60, verses 1 and 2, will come into existence. And that gross darkness will precipitate a time of trouble such as never existed on the earth. And that's saying something. Since there was a nation, not a nice place to be. So I want to now turn to this coming depression. And I get criticised for saying, oh, how do you know? I'm just showing you what the world's telling us, all right? That's all I'm showing you. This is the Forbes magazine. See the date? 29th of January. How long ago is that? Week or so? Financial pundits are predicting a total crash. Forbes saying a huge depression's coming. No one can predict how calamitous this could be. This would be worse than any financial calamity the country has ever seen. Far worse than the Great Recession, global financial crisis of 2007 and 8. Far worse than the Great Depression of the 1930s. Far worse than anything you would want to imagine, let alone live through. Now, I don't think Forbes is like a backstreet rag, is it? No. And I can show you hundreds of those, hundreds of them. This is perhaps our best sign of many signs, brothers and sisters. Christ's teachings about what it would be like when he returns are very clear. It is our best sign. You know, I've been criticised for saying, passing on the information of brethren, they hand me a thing that Christ is going to come in whatever year. Because of 1335 days in Daniel chapter 12, you get heavily criticised. I don't care anymore about the dates. I'm watching the seasons. And the seasons are telling me something. We're close. We're very close. Because he was very clear. He was clear that we would be taken from times of prosperity. I'm going to show you that. Turn to Luke 17 with me. We conclude tonight. Now, I've had to rush through a lot of stuff there, brothers and sisters. I apologise for that. I get carried away. This probably might be my last talk on Book Road. But I won't mind that, by the way. But let's have a look at Luke 17. Financial pundits have been predicting a massive crash for several years now. People like Harry Dent. He was saying 2022. He's a few years out, but he's not going to be wrong. And the continuing cost of living crisis around the globe is perhaps our best sign that we are close to the end. Because when it happens, like Forbes says, you've never seen anything like this. And the fact is that you've got massive debt all around the world, and you've got people now finding it difficult to have a place to live. We never had a problem of homeless people in Australia. Never had it. Not like Los Angeles was 65,000 10 years ago. They've now got 100,000, right? But now here in little Brisbane, well, not little, but Brisbane, where I live, we have people living in tents. Because one, they can't afford the rent or to buy, and two, there aren't enough houses anyway, right? So we've got a problem. And Christ's teachings about what it would be like when he came are very, very clear. The Americans, to their own people and to the rest of the world, 38.5 trillion. Forbes says that in 10 years' time, it will be 50 trillion. Unpayable. That 30.9 trillion is held by the public, that is, people in America and elsewhere, and 7.6 by other nations, like China. China's got a lot of it. This figure represents over 120% of the nation's GDP. Interest payments on this debt have become the top US federal expenditure, exceeding annual spending on defence. Did you read that? Defence and Medicare. The debt increased by approximately 2.25 trillion between January 25, when Trump came into office, and January 26, at the rate of $6 billion a day. It's unsustainable. The Great Depression is coming. China's population is imploding. We're down to 1.405 billion at the end of 2025. Fourth consecutive year of decline with a drop of 3.39 million people. Its birth rate has fallen to a record low of 7.92 million in 2025. The median age of those people is 40 years. China's construction sector has collapsed. Its manufacturing continues but faces decreased demand and huge Trump tariffs. Almost every European country is in deep financial crisis, led by Germany and France. Japan is in crisis. One of the few nations with low interest rates is repeating the disaster of 1929. You know what they did in 1929 in America? Because with interest rates were low, you borrowed money and you bought shares. And they went up like that until they got to the top and they went over the cliff. And you had people jumping out of buildings and selling Model Ts for $1. All right, that's what happened. Japan's doing exactly the same thing because they've got zero interest rate, federal rate, zero. You can borrow money at 1%. Why not go and buy shares when the market's going like that? Stupid idiots. They know the crash is coming. And now we've got new language in the financial sector. There are new terms being used, like the Hindenburg omen. You know what the Hindenburg was? It was a big airship full of hydrogen. It came into New York back in 1930 odd. And of course there was some kind of lightning or whatever, and the thing blew up. And it collapsed, the whole thing collapsed in a matter of seconds. They're calling it the Titanic syndrome. I think you know what happened to Titanic. Yeah. Yeah, it's on the ocean out here somewhere. Yeah, that's what's now being said in financial circles. And then you know from the price of gold and silver that we're close. In December, it got to $5,600 an ounce. It's back to 4,500. But have a look at the chart. Back in 2022, it was under $2,000 an ounce. And the rich people who know what's coming get out of US dollars, they get out of the banking system, and they buy gold. And there's not enough gold to buy, you buy silver. See the silver? The price last year was around $20, right? It got to 120. It's back down to $81 US. That's cheap, isn't it? It's telling you something, brothers and sisters. The rich people know the collapse is coming. When they go for the gold and the silver, watch out. So, what do you reckon? What did we read in Luke 17? We read that they were eating and drinking, gluttony, excessive drinking, culture of enjoyment, all sorts of revelry going on, marrying and being given to marry, jumping into this relationship, into that one, out of that one, into this one, buying and selling, building and planting. Yeah. Still happening, isn't it? But now it's beginning to become more difficult. We got what's called a cost of living crisis in Australia. You got one here in Canada? Yeah. So the prosperity is fading. Telling you something. Christ is near. And then all their prosperity collapsed in a day after the saints were taken away. That's why he said, didn't he? He said, as it was in the days of Noah and the days of Lot. He could have chosen any end of an era. He didn't. He chose the ones that had the same fundamental prosperity. Otherwise, his exhortation, remember Lot's wife, would be pointless. What if you were being persecuted? What if you were lining up like they did in the 1930s to get a bowl of soup for 8 hours? You line up for a bowl of soup and a slice of bread, which they won't do next time. They won't do that next time. That's why it's going to be a time of trouble, such as never was since there was a nation on earth. But if you were lined up in that soup queue, What would the exhortation, remember Lot's wife, mean? Nothing. Because he makes the point, doesn't he? Verse 33, he says, whosoever shall seek to save his life, that is, preserve what you've got now, shall lose it. He that's prepared to lose his life will save it eternally. Right? The exhortation would mean nothing if we were suffering persecution and privation. He's coming while it's still prosperous. And we need to be in the ark. We need to be in the ark. Because the door's going to be shut soon. God shut the door of the ark. Get in the ark. Stay in the ark. That's the lesson. And yet this world is so attractive, isn't it, to human nature. You want me to explain that to you? I'll come and talk to you about what's happening in my own family. And I'll be surprised if you're not seeing it in your ecclesias. It's happening. The world has got hold of too many of our people, brothers and sisters. And they haven't remembered Lot's wife. Have a look at the judgment seat in verse 34. I tell you in that night. Now that's an unusual thing because he's been talking about days. The days of Noah, the days of what? All right? Days of opportunity, days of probation. He's also talking about a day. Thus shall it be in the day. Why does he change it to night in verse 34? Well, because he wants you to go back to Genesis 19, verse 1. That's why. He's just said, remember Lot's wife. When did the angels come to Lot's house in Sodom? In the morning? No. In the evening. And that's where they're going to turn up to your house and mine. In the evening. When you can most expect people to be home. And there's a judgment seat process here. How do we know that? Well, it says in verse 34, you can cross out the word men all through this. You see it in italics? It's not there. You're not talking about two men in a bed. They'd love that, wouldn't they, the humanists? You're not talking about, you're talking about Lot and his wife and their companions today. Me and my wife. I tell you, in that night, there shall be two in one bed. The one shall be taken and the other shall be left. Look up the Greek words. The word taken is paralambano in the Greek. It's first used in Matthew chapter 1 twice. When the angel says to Joseph, fear not, Joseph, to take unto thee Mary thy wife. It's about taking someone into a marriage. Lot is going in to the marriage of the Lamb. But the other will be left. He doesn't mean left behind. The word in the Greek is theani. It's the word the Apostle Paul uses in 1 Corinthians 7 when he says, let him not put her away. It's about being put out of a marriage. So Lot goes into the marriage to the right hand. Lot's wife goes to the left. The judgment seat, brothers and sisters. And it's about to happen. So what's the antidote? Chapter 18, verse 1. And the King James is a little bit deficient. There should be another word here after the word spake. It's the Greek word K, K-A-I. It means also. He spake also a parable unto them. So the parable of the unjust judge that follows is all about faith. It's all about people who are praying day and night, which is why he says back in verse 31 of chapter 17, in that day he which shall be upon the housetop. What did they use the housetop for in Israel, brothers and sisters? Prayer and meditation. Christ expects to find people like that. Yeah, he does. Shall he find faith on the earth? Oh, you say, but there's a definite article. Yes, there is, but we used the wrong one. We use THE, the faith, thinking it's the faith, in the statement of faith. I'm not talking about that. Will he find this kind of faith of people who are praying day and night and pleading with their God to send his son? Will he find that kind of faith? Or will he find Lot's wife who wanted to stay where she was? Only we can answer that. He spake a parable also unto them to this end, because it's based on what had preceded it, that men ought always to pray and not to faint. Antidote to the world in which we live, brothers and sisters? Get into that book. Get into that book. And when your mind is in that book, you cannot help yourself but to get down on your knees and pray and plead with our God, as I do every single day, several times a day. Please, please send your Son. It's the only answer to my problems, to my family's problems, to your problems, to our brotherhood's problems, and to the world's problems. And all the signs tell us it's not too far.
Don't forget to hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. Drop a comment in the comment section and let us know what you thought. And make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new upload. Please share it and spread the word. Thanks for watching. And remember to come back soon.